The night Beijing forgot how to sleep began with rain. Not the gentle kind that kissed the pavement and left quietly, but the kind that pressed against windows like it wanted answers. Neon lights bled into the streets, reflections stretching and breaking with every passing car. Somewhere between the thrum of traffic and the hum of distant sirens, Wang, Yibo, stood alone under the overhang of an empty theater, helmet tucked under his arm, rainwater sliding down the dark fabric of his jacket. He hadn't planned to stop here, but some places remembered you even when you tried to forget them. The theater was old now, half abandoned, its posters sun-faded ghosts of stories once told. Years ago, this was where everything had begun, where scripts were read with trembling hands, where laughter spilled into the streets at midnight, where silence once meant understanding instead of distance. Yibo tilted his head back, letting the rain hit his face. Fame had taught him how to stand in storms without flinching. What it never taught him was how to stand still when the past suddenly breathed again. Across the street, a black car slowed. He felt it before he saw it, that strange, impossible pull, like a melody remembered before the first note played. The car stopped. The door opened. Zhan stepped out into the rain. Time did something strange then. It didn't stop, it folded. Zhan hadn't changed the way magazines claimed people never changed. He still carried himself with that quiet warmth, that softness that felt deliberate in a world that rewarded sharpness. His hair was damp almost instantly, rain clinging to his lashes, his coat darkening as he took a single step forward and then stopped. They stared at each other across the street like two unfinished sentences. Once, their lives had run parallel, same sets, same schedules, same dreams whispered during breaks when the cameras weren't rolling. Once, they had been inseparable in ways neither of them knew how to explain out loud. Once was enough, or so they told themselves. The rain intensified, drumming harder against metal and glass, until Zhan finally crossed the street. Each step felt measured, careful, as if one wrong move might shatter whatever fragile truce the universe had created by letting them meet again like this. "Yibo," Zhan said. Just his name. Nothing more. Yibo swallowed. His voice, when it came, was steady, but only because he forced it to be. "I didn't know you were back in Beijing." "I wasn't supposed to be," Zhan replied, a small smile flickering like a memory. Plans change. They stood there, rain-soaked and exposed, while the city rushed around them, unaware it was interrupting something monumental. For a moment, Yibo almost laughed at how absurd it was, two people who had faced roaring crowds now reduced to silence by a shared past. "Do you want to come inside?" Yibo asked, gesturing to the theater behind him. Zhan hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old velvet. The lobby lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows that stretched and merged across the floor. Posters lined the walls, stories of love, loss, and everything in between. Yibo peeled off his jacket, shaking off the rain, while Zhan wandered a few steps ahead, fingertips grazing the faded frames. "You remember this place," Zhan said softly. "I remember everything," Yibo replied before he could stop himself. That was the problem. They sat in the front row of the empty auditorium, stage lights long dead, seats creaking with the weight of memories. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy. The kind that pressed against your chest and demanded honesty. "You disappeared," Yibo said at last. Zhan didn't flinch. "So did you." "I stayed," Yibo countered. "I just stopped reaching." Zhan turned to him then, really looked at him. Because reaching started to hurt. The words settled between them like truth always did. Quiet, undeniable. Back then, everything had been louder. The cameras, the expectations, the whispers that followed them like shadows. They had learned to speak in glances, to hide meaning in smiles, to pretend that closeness was just professionalism. The world loved stories, but only the ones it could control. They had been young, brilliant, terrified. "I thought," Zhan said slowly, "that if I walked away, it would protect what we had. And I thought," Yibo replied, "that if I stayed silent, you'd come back." Neither plan had worked. A faint chuckle escaped Zhan, brittle at the edges. "We were terrible at this." Yibo smiled despite himself. "Still are." The rain outside softened, its anger fading into a whisper. In that quiet, memories rose uninvited, Late-night rehearsals, shared headphones, the way Zhan used to hum under his breath when he was nervous. The way Yibo pretended not to notice but always did. "You know," Zhan said, voice barely above a breath. "There were nights I almost called." Yibo's hands clenched. "Why didn't you?" "Because once I heard your voice, I wouldn't have been able to let go again." That confession cracked something open. Yibo stood abruptly, pacing the narrow aisle like movement might burn away the ache. "Do you have any idea how many times I replayed everything? Wondering where I went wrong. Wondering if I imagined it all." Zhan stood too, closing the distance between them. "You didn't imagine it." Their eyes met, close now, dangerously so. The air felt charged, alive with words neither dared to say outright. "What if—" Zhan began, then stopped. He took a breath. "What if once really was enough?" Yibo shook his head. "It was enough to change me, but not enough to end it." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, like the sky agreeing. They left the theater together, not touching, but closer than they had been in years. The rain had slowed to a mist, the streets gleaming under the city lights. Zhan's car waited at the curb, driver discreetly looking away. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Zhan said, fingers tightening around the door handle. "Back overseas?" Yibo nodded, heart sinking. "Of course you are. But," Zhan added, meeting his gaze, "I don't want to leave like last time." Yibo's breath caught. "Then don't." Zhan smiled, a real one this time, warm and aching and familiar. "I can't promise forever." "I'm not asking for forever," Yibo replied. "Just honesty." They stood there, the city holding its breath. Zhan reached out, not quite touching Yibo's hand, but close enough that the warmth was undeniable. "One scared me because it mattered too much." Yibo leaned in, forehead resting lightly against Zhan's. "It mattered because it was real." For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. No cameras, no expectations, no noise. Just two people standing at the edge of what had been and what could still be. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. When Zhan finally got into the car, he rolled down the window. "I'll call," he said. Yibo nodded. "This time I'll answer." The car pulled away, taillights fading into the wet streets. Yibo watched until it disappeared. Chest tight, but lighter than it had been in years. Once had been enough to break them. But maybe, just maybe, it was also enough to bring them back to the beginning. And sometimes, that was all a story ever needed. The night did not end when Xiao Zhan's car disappeared. It lingered. Wang, Yibo, stood there longer than he should have, rain misting his hair, the city blurring into streaks of light. His phone felt heavier in his pocket than it ever had before. 4 years. Silence had been his shield. Tonight, it felt like a dare. He rode home without turning on music. The engine's low hum filled the space where memories kept trying to speak. Every traffic light dragged him backward. Late rehearsals, shared takeout boxes balanced on script pages, Zhan's laughter breaking through exhaustion like sunlight through fog. Yibo had told himself those memories were harmless. But memory was patient. It waited until the exact wrong moment to remind you what you'd lost. In his apartment, the city spread below him like a living map of stars. He dropped his keys on the counter, shrugged off his jacket, and leaned against the glass. Beijing had watched him grow up, watched him succeed, watched him become untouchable to everyone except one person who no longer stood beside him. Once was enough. That phrase had followed him for years like a verdict. Enough success. Enough distance. Enough pretending it didn't hurt. His phone buzzed. Yibo froze. Unknown number. For half a second, fear outweighed hope. Then he answered. "Hello." Silence. A breath. Familiar. "Yibo," Xiao Zhan said, softly, like the word itself carried weight. Yibo closed his eyes. "You said you'd call." "I said I would," Zhan replied. "I didn't say when." Despite himself, Yibo laughed, quiet, incredulous. "You always did that. And you always noticed," Zhan said. The sound of an airport announcement echoed faintly through the line. Yibo's chest tightened. "You're already there." "Yeah." A pause stretched between them, fragile but alive. "Do you remember," Zhan said, "the first night shoot we ever had?" Yibo smiled without meaning to. "You fell asleep standing up. You pretended not to see. I pretended you weren't leaning on my shoulder." Zhan exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh. I was scared that night. You were scared every night, Yibo said gently. And you stayed anyway. Yibo's reflection stared back at him from the window, older, sharper, but still undeniably him. I didn't know how to leave. Zhan's voice softened. I didn't know how to stay. The airport noise faded as Zhan moved somewhere quieter. I've been thinking, he continued, about that night at the theater, about how we looked at each other like the world hadn't already tried to rewrite us. Yibo leaned his forehead against the glass. It felt like standing in a place time forgot, or a place time was waiting for us to return to. Another pause. This one felt different, charged, deliberate. Yibo, Zhan said carefully, if I come back not for work, not for appearances, just to talk, would you still be there? Yibo didn't hesitate. I never left. Zhan laughed softly. You always say the dangerous things, so calmly. Someone has to, Yibo replied. You always run when things get too real. That's not fair. It's true. The line went quiet. Then Zhan said, what if once was enough because it proved something? Yibo frowned. Proved what? That some connections don't need repetition to be real. They just need the chance to breathe again. Yibo turned from the window, pacing slowly. Then why does it feel like unfinished music? Because, Zhan said, voice steady now. We stopped the song in the middle. The words hit harder than Yibo expected. He stopped pacing. When do you come back? 3 days. Yibo's breath caught. That's soon. Or late, Zhan replied, depending on how you look at it. After they hung up, sleep didn't come easily. Yibo dreamed of rain and stage lights, of hands brushing without touching, of voices calling his name from behind curtains. When morning arrived, it felt like a continuation rather than a beginning. 3 days passed like a held breath. On the 4th evening, Yibo found himself back at the theater. He hadn't planned it. His feet just knew. The doors were unlocked this time. Inside, temporary lights illuminated the stage. Someone was preparing for renovation, for change. The irony wasn't lost on him. Footsteps echoed behind him. You always get here early, Zhan said. Yibo turned. Zhan stood there, travel-worn but smiling, coat draped over one arm. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Zhan crossed the space between them, stopping close, but not too close. You came back, Yibo said. I told you I would. They walked the stage together, the wooden boards creaking beneath their steps. Dust floated in the light like tiny stars. I used to think, Zhan said, that leaving was the bravest thing I could do. And now? Yibo asked. And now I think staying might be harder. Yibo nodded. Harder doesn't mean wrong. Zhan looked at him then, eyes searching. Do you still believe once was enough? Yibo considered the question carefully. Once was enough to change us, but not enough to erase us. Zhan smiled, slow and genuine. That might be the best answer you've ever given. They sat on the edge of the stage, legs dangling like they used to during breaks years ago. No scripts, no cameras, just them. Whatever happens next, Zhan said quietly. I don't want to disappear again. Yibo glanced at him. Then don't. Their shoulders touched. Accidentally, intentionally, it didn't matter. The contact felt electric, grounding. Outside, the city continued as it always had. Inside, something long paused began to move again. Once had been enough to prove the story was real. Now, they were finally brave enough to see where it led. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear what happens next, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves emotional stories, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful storytelling like this. Your support keeps these stories alive. Red Heart.